My name is Julie Jones. I'm a former police detective from the United Kingdom. Served for over 10 years over there in capacity as a detective and undercover operator, and then in the intelligence unit. So spent quite a lot of the time of that service learning about internet investigation and intelligence and how the online world can be applied to the real world in terms of both investigation, safety, and security. That moved into social media as the years went on and the technology changed. So this was prior to iPhones and prior to Facebook, and all of that technology has come along in the meantime and really changed how we communicate and how we live our lives. So for the following few years, I traveled around the world quite extensively, teaching how to use the internet as an investigative tool, as well as how to promote health, safety, and security online and in the real world as well, through the use of technology. In the last few years, I've run my own business now, and my business is really around threat assessment, threat analysis, gap analysis, and online investigation and research. So quite a lot of risk assessment and threat assessment for government, corporate, law enforcement, military, again, globally. But these days with more of a focus on human trafficking and quite a lot of a focus in Central America. So again, safety, security, threat assessment, and digital and technical optimization for safety and security.
Good morning, everybody. My name is Carl Prophet. I actually started my career in the military. I served in special forces and then went over and was asked actually to set up the first gang unit in British Columbia. My specialty is protection. I've pretty much spent my whole career working with high-risk individuals, ensuring that they are safe. And, the foundation for this course is really interesting for us because both Julie and I, have been working in the protection industry for very, very long. And one of the biggest challenges we have is by the time we usually get involved, it's too late. So for us, once you have an incident, that family, that person is impacted for life. So if you get threatened, if your family gets threatened, the consequences of that, is ongoing. A lot of times we can come in, we can mitigate the threat, we can manage the threat. But the challenge is what the family or the person has been through because of the threat we can't really address. So a few years ago, we really started doing a lot of research into what causes a threat? How does a threat look? What is the pathway to violence? And that's what the presentation is based on today. For us, we've both done quite a bit of work with certain doctors around the province and certain health authorities. And we really want to start alleviating or trying to reduce the reality of an incident occurring. So today's presentation is more about what we can do to actually ensure we mitigate some of those challenges and also how to identify some risks before they become reality. So saying that, we'll just jump right into the PowerPoint.
Yeah. So I'm just going to share my screen here. Just bear with me. Just bear with me a moment.
Okay, so we'll jump right in. If you want to bring up the first slide for me, please.
Yeah, for sure.
So as we've seen over the last, sadly over the last year, there's been a dramatic increase in the targeting of healthcare professions. I did a lot of research, and I actually know a couple of the guys who were assigned originally to the Romales file. And, back then we were seeing really one-off, very unique targetings based on a doctor's certain practice. But over the last 2 years, we've seen a dramatic increase of just random targeting of individuals based on what they do. So this is no longer about, an individual you've dealt with who's angry or upset with the service he's got. Now we're seeing some general targeting of practitioners just purely based on the fact that they work in the healthcare service. So what is the goals of our training today? Well, we want to understand what makes us vulnerable. We want to understand and predict personal and potential behavior. We want to discuss situational awareness and risk management. The big one is online exposure. And then we want to talk a little bit what we can do to make ourselves safer and make our families safer throughout this process. So, what are we trying to do? Well, the big thing for us is any time in life when we deal with a potential risk, we want to be able to identify it. We want to be able to assess it, prioritize it, and then either eliminate it and reduce it. And the reality is this is something we do on a daily basis. Anytime you go anywhere, if you're driving in traffic and somebody cuts you off, you actually go through this process. What we're hoping to do today is actually start identifying key things that are specific around violence, targeted violence, and the pathway to violence. And the reason is if you can start incorporating those in the risk assessment process, it would be like when somebody cuts you off when you're driving. You have a natural response to how you can manage that situation. So why is it important about knowing what the type of attacks are? Well, the reality is we react differently in each type of attack. So, as we go through the attacks today, our response will be different based on what the person is trying to achieve. So, if somebody's trying to steal your phone or steal your wallet, the way you're going to respond to that is totally different than if it's somebody who's shown up at your house, is unhappy about the service you got, or is angry that a family member did not get the appropriate service that they were hoping for. So what are attacks of opportunity? Well, they're usually financially motivated. They're usually property crimes. And, they're usually with people who've got drug dependencies or mental health. And the reality is very few attacks of opportunity result in violence. Usually the only time violence occurs is if the person who's under attack resists or doesn't comply with the person's needs or requests. Impulsive violence is something you folks mostly deal with on a regular basis in your workplace. This is reactive in nature. So this is when you give somebody bad news or somebody is not getting what they want. It's immediate, it's spontaneous. The process, so when we talk about the pathway to violence, the process from grievance to attack is very fluid and usually occurs in a couple of seconds. We will talk later on in the presentation about how to identify these and how to manage them better. The one we're going to spend quite a bit of time today on is targeted attacks, because targeted attacks usually result in the person being impacted. Now, when we talk about targeted attacks, it's shifted dramatically over the years. 5 years ago, when we were talking about targeted attacks, it usually would be something physical. So it would be actual physical violence, or it would be somebody targeting your house. The shift we've seen now, which has been extremely dramatic, is it's moved more online. And damage to reputation is new as well. And the challenge with online targeted attacks are they extremely hard to manage, and the likelihood of getting a criminal file out of it is almost impossible. I worked a targeted attack of a prosecutor out of Cranbrook, where we worked it for 8 years. And the information being posted online was horrific, and it was targeting a prosecutor's children. And it took us 8 years to get a criminal charge through. Person went to court and they got 15 days. So the challenge with targeted attacks, and Julie, when she starts talking about online attacks, can explain more about this. But these files can go on for years. So it's ensuring that you have a bit of a buffer there. So if somebody decides to target you, it's not something that's extremely easy for them to be able to achieve. Now, for me, the attack process is so important. So when we were talking in the beginning about, risk assessment, and you drive in your car, somebody cuts you off, and you're able to respond, and it's just because of years and years of driving. Well, the reality is most violent situations most targeted attacks have to go through a process. And the process has been studied, and you know, it's something that's used by the FBI, RCMP, everybody when we do threat risk assessments. And the reality for us is by educating people on the process, a lot of times we're actually able to alleviate the attack because we can identify it. So for somebody to target you, it's got to start off with a grievance. So there's got to be some form of interaction. And you know, when I was working with the gangs, we used to find a lot of times the grievance was just, you know, the person wanted to prove himself to his fellow gang members. So he would target a police officer or he would target a prosecutor. The grievance in the healthcare authority can either be somebody direct, so somebody you've dealt with, or it could be indirect. It could be the family. It could be their supporters. And we are seeing a lot of this lately. So we are seeing a lot of times when the individual will get what they feel is a service that's not appropriate. And then you will see the people around them start to target the organization or the individual. And a lot of times it's online. Now, there needs to be an idea. There needs to be a thought process. So again, you know, if somebody cuts you off, excuse me, you might respond. You might, you know, say something not really great, or you might, you know, hit your horn. But you might not actually get to the point of thinking, you know, I'm going to follow that person now and I can give them a piece of my mind. So you need the thought process to kick in. And the big one for us, what we always focus on is research, planning, and preparation. And the reason is this is where you can start to alleviate target attacks. So this is the area we always say to people, we hope you focus on, you know, if you're in a unique situation. So as we go through today's PowerPoint, we'll refer back to research, planning, and preparation quite a bit, because when people start to gather information about you, that is an identification that you could be, you know, potentially at risk. If I wanted to target anybody on this call, I need to know where you work. I need to know where you live. I need to know how you get between the two places. I need to know, do you have a family? So the research is a lot of times where people actually identify that they plan in an attack. You have the preparation. The breach is the moments just before the attack occurs, and then you actually have the actual attack. So you heard me talking about pathway to violence, and the reason it's important is this is where, like I say, we can use this information to actually start an appropriate threat assessment and start the response to it. So usually it starts with, you know, a person with a sense of injustice. So they've got to have gone through something. There's got to be an incident which they believe they were treated unfairly. They've all of a sudden develop a sense of mission or a sense of loss. And the ones that concern us a lot is when somebody has got nothing, you know, worth living for anymore. So a lot of times we'll look at an individual, they've lost a family member. Because of this, they're losing their house, they're losing their identity, they're not able to work. All those are what we call risk factors, and we take them into account when we do risk assessments. Sense of destiny, unfortunately, is becoming a big one. Desire for revenge is something you see a lot on online attacks. You know, somebody feels they've been treated unfairly and they want that person to experience what they went through. And then the recognition or fame. So as somebody goes through the idea process, this is where they talk to others about it. They identify with other assassinations. They have a fascination with weapons, and there's fixation on anniversary dates. So a lot of times in online targeted attacks, what we'll see is the person might drop off for a couple of months. So the online stalking or the online harassment will actually stop. And then on the anniversary date of an incident, you'll see it flare up again. The big thing we watch for as well is when we talk about discussion with others is monitoring people's social media. So part of what we do when we've identified a potential risk is Julie actually goes onto the dark web, blogs, Facebook chats, group chats to see what they're discussing and what they're talking about, because based on what is being said, we can determine what the potential risks are. So some of the telltale signs, and this is the area that's so important to us. Stalking, target research, suspicious inquiries, and information gathering. I had a really interesting file last week where we had an individual whose office received a phone call, and it was somebody claiming to be a defense lawyer trying to get information. And the receptionist, wanting to help this person, gave out the person who's being targeted cell phone number, personal cell phone number. So a lot of times we say to people, if somebody's asking information about you, that is a potential alert that you need to pay attention to. Same as when you get in unique requests for friends on social media sites. And Julie will talk a bit about that more. But if you're starting to have people reach out to you or reach out to your peers or reach out to your support that is unknown, a lot of times that's a telltale sign that somebody's trying to gather more information from you. And this might not only be for a targeted attack based on your profession. A lot of times this type of social engineering is to gather information so you can be financially targeted. Unfortunately, we're starting to see this more and more where somebody will call up, and Julie will talk a little bit about a SIM swap later on, but we've seen individuals lose millions of dollars because somebody's called up and asked 3 basic questions, and that person believes they're talking to their bank, or they believe they're talking to their cell phone provider, and they give out key information which allows the person then to go in and seize their assets. So very important to understand the process. So the big thing for us is for a targeted attack to occur, and this can be either an online attack or an in-person attack, you need motive, you need means, and you need an opportunity. So what we're going to focus on today is how do we reduce opportunity? And to give you an example of this is we had an individual threatened. The person who threatened them was in the forensics unit. So the reality is when we do the risk assessment, we look at it and we go, okay, this person definitely had motive. But means, no, because he was locked up. An opportunity, no, because he was locked up. And because he was locked up, we could put an alert with forensics that if he did escape or anything happened, we would be notified immediately, and then we could respond to the person who was under direct threat. So really important that what we try to do today is remove opportunity. So if somebody develops a means or develops a motive and it turns into means, we take away opportunity. Now, a lot of times when we go through this training, people will look at this and go, okay, this is extremely, high risk and it's for a specific situation. The challenge for us is, like I said, once somebody has started to gather information on you, it's almost impossible for us to pull it back. So, today is about proactive and preventive rather than reactive. I would rather work with people and say, we want to put these safeguards in place because if an incident occurs, then you do have a buffer and you have some form of protection around you, rather than coming in after the fact and an individual has already been able to gain access to your home address, because then for us, it's extremely hard to build a security platform and program. So we're going to talk a little bit about personal life transparency. And for me, this is a really interesting one because in today's day and age, you can't say to people, you can't be on Facebook or you can't have social media. I've got a 21-year-old son and a 19-year-old son. And if I told them they couldn't do that, they would be horrified. But the other, high-end point about this one is a lot of times we don't realize who actually makes us vulnerable. And a good example of this was when I was working on the gangs. I was behind the security when they took the Hells Angels clubhouses, and Julie was brought in to do an investigation into my life and my family's life, and specifically around risk to us online. And when they initially brought her in, I was kind of, I don't want to say challenged, but I didn't see the need for it because I don't have a social media process. If you Google me, there's a couple of newspaper articles. There's very little, about me personally. It's all work related and it's all third party. So, Julie came in and I'm like, this is a great idea, but I'm not overly concerned. The reality was at the end of the investigation, through my children's accounts, she was able to gain access to everything. She knew where we lived. She knew what our schedules were. She had photos of our house. She had photos of our friends. She knew where my kids played sport. So when we look at personal life transparency, it's not only how transparent our lives is, but it's how people around us can impact our safety and our security. So I'm going to turn it over to Julie for a bit.
Thank you. Yeah, and just to add on to that and that whole idea, and for me, when I'm doing any research or investigation, any threat assessment, or giving anybody advice about personal life transparency and personal life professionalism, so keeping your personal life personal and your business life business focused, I'm very much of the mind that you should be able to go about your business with as little inconvenience as possible, because the security and the safety elements have already been put in place. And as Carl said, we're able to anticipate certain things happening and mitigate certain risks based on your lifestyle, based on your family, your children, how you work, where you work, and the potential level of threats to you. So for me, it's never about, okay, lock everything down, go off, take all your social media accounts down, don't live your life. That's the opposite of where I want people to get to. What I always aim for is for people to be able to live their lives the way that they want to live, with as much safety and security as possible, with safeguards in place so that if something does occur, we've already thought about it, or you've already given it at least some consideration, and we've put steps in place to prevent an escalation of things that could be damaging to your safety or your reputation. So some of the things we're going to look at today in terms of online is taking a look at how the online threats, online damage to reputation, online harassment and stalking can happen, and what we can do to mitigate that. And I know that some of this may sound scary, and it's not meant to frighten anybody. This whole presentation is not meant to leave you terrified and think that you can't go online or leave your house, but it is important to know what's possible, and then we can determine what's probable or what's likely in any given situation and mitigate those risks. So this is delivered at a very high level and not necessarily likely to happen, but understanding how the technology can be used, understanding that technology is neutral and it's how it's used that is that determines whether or not it's threatening or whether or not you're safe. The same tools that are used to harass you or to stalk you or to communicate with you are the same tools that we use to investigate and to protect and to secure your life. So there's no magic here. It really is about the application of the tools and anticipating potential threats. So as Carl mentioned, threats can be targeted or random, but are often sustained. The targeted threats are the threats that are sustained. Random attacks tend to be, as Carl mentioned, fairly spontaneous. If somebody is targeting you, we've seen through the pathway to violence that these sustained targeting, when it becomes personal and when it gains traction, or even if it doesn't, it becomes a fixation. And many of the stalking files I've worked on go over years and years, if not decades. I'm dealing with one stalking case right now, and this is a female doctor, and she has been stalked by an individual that she met in university. So this is not a patient or somebody that she was involved in through her profession, but this was somebody that she had a very brief relationship with in university. She's now well into her 40s, and this person has stalked her entire life and continues to do so. Wherever she goes physically in the world to get away from him, he just shows up. And he stalks her constantly online. He stalks her family, and he has really limited her career and her personal life because he makes her life such a misery. And because I came in well after the fact, I came in 20 years after this stalking has happened, and we've managed to have him deported from a number of countries. We've managed to put a lot of steps in place, but psychologically for her, the damage has already been done and is very difficult. So,
and if I can interrupt you for a second, what's interesting for me on that file is Julie's been involved now for how many months would you say?
Maybe 6 months.
So 6 months. We have more than enough information for criminal charges. The police agree there's more than enough information for criminal charges. The challenge is the justice system and the way it works at the moment. We still don't have criminal charges. Mm-hmm. So even though there's a bit of a process in place around her, after 6 months, there's still not a criminal file. We believe there's a criminal file coming shortly. Yeah. But these are the challenges, and like I said, this is why preventive is so important for us, because the reality is any incidents that occurs, the response can take time. Investigations take time. Getting the file to Crown for a request for charge takes time. Getting it before the courts take time. And when it's your world that's been blown apart, when you're having daily bombardment, either in person or online, it has a long-term impact on you. And this file gives you just an idea of some of the challenges we face from a reactive standpoint. Julie came in, was able to gather all of the information. I put a bit of a safety buffer in place, but we're 6 months into the file and we still don't have what we require to be able to give this woman peace of mind. And like I said, that just reiterates why it's so important to be proactive and prevent these type of incidences. Sorry.
Yeah, no, that's good. And she is doing everything right, and she's done everything right from the start, except not reported it sooner. And that's it. It's really, really important. And Carl will talk a bit more to this later in the presentation, that keeping things to yourself, not reporting things, actually really hinders investigations. So if you're unsure, please do report as soon as possible, because the earlier we can, not necessarily we, but the earlier it can be detected, the earlier the evidence can be captured, the more chance there is of a prosecution, of warrants being able to be issued and executed for technical information, for peace bonds and the like to be put into place to protect people.
Julie, there's a question in the Q&A, and it's just asking if you can explain geofencing.
Yes, of course. I'll come right down to that in a moment. And yeah, I'm hoping I'll be able to demonstrate geofencing as well if we have time in this presentation. So I'll just move on here. So Carl talked about financially motivated crime, and that's not really a focus here, except it is worth mentioning in terms of things like SIM swaps, and in terms of it may not be the primary focus of a threat or a targeted attack against you, but people will look for any leverage they can. And if the situation that has happened to them has put them in poverty or has created a situation where they can't work, then that might be the form of revenge, that they want you to experience poverty. They want to attack your house. They want to attack, they may see you driving a nice car, and that may be the trigger. So although the original grievance may be nothing around financial, it can become a mechanism for revenge, or a mechanism as an equalizer for them. But it's not necessarily the target. So again, it's a case of just keeping an open mind. You don't necessarily know where the threat comes from, and the action that's taken around the threat may not necessarily make sense to you. It may not be logical, because we're not necessarily dealing with somebody that's acting logically in these situations. The other one to really mention here is personal relationships and workplace stalking. This presentation doesn't just focus on external threats. So these are, many relationships begin and end in the workplace, and a large majority of stalking cases that we see, stalking, harassment, online harassment, damage to reputation, actually comes from within the workplace or within your profession as a result of not just personal relationships that have ended, but maybe somebody receiving a promotion above somebody else that thinks they should have received that promotion, somebody being fired or removed out of a position for misconduct or for an error of some kind. So it's not just romantic relationships that we're talking about. It can be any number of workplace grievances that then turn into revenge or some kind of threatening or stalking situation. So just to be aware of all of that. What geofencing, so this occurs, and this can occur in one of two ways in terms of investigation. So to geofence something is to create a fence or an area around a location. So let's say, for example, somebody is trying to find your social media postings or any social media postings out of a location. There's certain social media tools, deep web tools, that you can use to create what we call a ring fence around a geographic location. So that may be as small as a building like a house, or as large as a building like a hospital, or even as large as an area like a city block or a region. And you can lift up or you can create or pull out all of the social media postings from that area. So let's say you ring fence a hospital, you can then see all of the social media postings that are being posted in that hospital. So this may be angry tweets, it may be personal messages on Facebook or on Instagram, it may be images, maybe a picture of you, maybe a picture of your vehicle, something like that, that is lifted out of social media from ring fencing that area. Now, this can only be done if location services are turned on, depending on the tool that you're using. There are tools now where you can ring fence a certain area, and even if location services are not turned on, it may well be that it's picking up on hashtags or certain users within that location. Now, what can be done with that is reverse geofencing or reverse geolocation lookup, whereby once you have somebody's username, so let's say you ring fence a hospital and you see all the social media postings coming out of that hospital. Those social media postings contain people's usernames, hashtags, and the data that's being posted to social media, whether that's images, video, or text. You can then take that username and insert that username into other deep web tools, which will then give you a geolocation of everywhere that that person has posted. So it's a great way of finding somebody's home address, usual places of routine. So let's say you take your child to work to school every day on the way to work, and your child has social media, and as you're driving along, they're on Snapchat, or they're on Facebook, or they're on Instagram, chatting with their friends and posting to social media. Private chats would not be included in geofencing, but anything publicly available would. If your child has location services switched on even for certain tools, when they're posting, that is potentially being picked up. If they're also posting from school, from on that journey, from the local place that you go on the weekend, whether it's a sports event or a practice, and they're also posting from home, even if it's not you, even if it's them, that is the potential there is to track that home address, track those places using those usernames. So it may not be you, it may be somebody that is around you that is posting using location services or posting in such a regular way that somebody is able to track your journey to work, your regular routines, based on somebody else in your vehicle or somebody else that you spend time with. And it only takes one or two occasions for somebody to be able to reverse engineer that search and that location. If we have time, which I don't think we will, but I'll try and demonstrate that. So yeah, using only a username, it may be possible to determine certain events and patterns of life. So when we talk about online personal data, what kind of things can be found? And what we're really looking for is what can be found about you or about your life without you posting it there. So this is often information that's posted outside of your control, that you may not know exists and that you didn't put there. So common friends and associates, that's a fairly common one. And that's as simple as locking down your friends lists on your social media accounts. If your friends lists are open, it's a very simple setting to lock those things down. Be aware that if you've got your friends list on social media locked down and private, but you've got photos open for public viewing, and other people are liking or commenting on your photos, it's like having your friends list open, because your friends, if they're posting on or liking any of those images on any social media platform, then your circle of associates can still be seen and found. So it's almost like an all or nothing thing. You either have to lock everything down, or there's really no point in locking anything down. Events past and future. So this might be events that you are invited to. This may be events even in private groups that can be found on social media. Bear in mind that having something in a platform doesn't necessarily stop it being searchable in Google. So even if your Facebook account is restricted from being included in social media accounts, if you're in a group and that group is having an event, that event is likely searchable on Google, and your association to that group or to that event may well still be detected. So again, awareness of what's possible. Locations we've talked about, images not belonging to you. So this may be something that you're either tagged or not tagged in. This may be images that are related to your work or personal or your family. And again, this is not you that's posting this image. This may be a family member that may put you in certain places at certain times or at certain events or associated to certain people that may not be within your control. Comments on posts. Again, these are comments not necessarily that you have made, but comments that other people make about you. And these may even be positive comments. So this may be somebody saying had a great experience with this person, saw them at this place and time, saw them again here, bumped into them in this place, really friendly. This may be, if you're working in a small community, this may be comments that are entirely unrelated to your work life at all, but just people that know you or know about you, that saw you in a certain place, that can put you at risk. So again, it's not necessarily things that you post. This is about your awareness of your entire life and your personal life transparency. Groups and dating sites. Dating sites is really important. I'm really pushing for dating sites to not feel so taboo. People use them and they're fairly mainstream and commonplace. And understanding the risks with dating sites is very, very important, because we tend to think that, well, it's not social media, so I can chat with this person and I'm entirely okay because we're in this dating site environment and we're all here for the same thing, so there's no risk. But what people don't realize is that dating site conversations can still be screenshotted. Images and things that you post in dating site private messages can still be copied and can still be exposed. There's certain groups that will go in and hack dating sites specifically and release that information out into the public domain. And there are some unscrupulous people that will buy those stolen accounts and that stolen data and sell them to other people for distribution, for blackmail, for even social engineering. So again, I'm not saying don't use these sites. I'm just saying be cautious and recognize that anything that is private in the moment can become public at a later time. So if you are on a dating site, typically those sites are not encrypted. They may use some lower form of encryption, but they rely on user to user communication for the most part, for anything that's not in the public part of it. If you are on a dating site and there is a communication with somebody, I would recommend moving over to an encrypted chat site such as Signal or WhatsApp, not necessarily WhatsApp, Telegram. Signal or Telegram, where you have control over that communication. You can delete both sides or either side of the conversation, including images, so that the other person, it will also tell you whether those communications can be screenshotted or have been screenshotted by the other person. So there's all kinds of things you can do to stay safe. It's a case of understanding your technical landscape. Do you have a question, Holly?
Yes, so one just came in. It says, I am unclear on the meaning of social engineering in this context.
For sure. So social engineering is when somebody tries to, or when somebody manufactures a story or some kind of purpose for trying to gather information about you. So let's say somebody is seeking to find your name or your phone number, or even what time you are at a certain place. They will phone up or email pretending to be somebody else. And they may do this several times to gather several different pieces of information. The example that Carl used earlier was somebody phoning up pretending to be a defense lawyer, looking to speak to a prosecutor to discuss a case or a trial. in this case, it was somebody pretending to be a defense prosecutor. And because they spoke professionally, they spoke confidently, the person that they spoke to may have felt some intimidation or may have felt like they couldn't refuse that person. And it's the same in your environment. If you have an assistant or somebody else in your practice, somebody else in the hospital, and it may be anybody that doesn't really understand social engineering and what can be done, and they may feel intimidated, coerced, worried, especially if they think somebody's life is at risk, into giving away personal information, including cell phone numbers. People can be very persuasive, and when somebody's very motivated to find out information, they can come up with really great stories, and they're very likely to have done the research first. So they may find something that only somebody that knows you would know about you by doing research on social media. This is why it's important to keep social media locked down and your information private. It's not because that information is necessarily risky. It's that that information can be used in a social engineering play to find more information about you. One of the things I like to say is, privacy is not important until it's too late. And people often say, well, why should I care about my personal information? Nobody cares about, where I go for coffee, but it may well be that that piece of information can be used in social engineering to find out more personal information about you. So hopefully that explains that. If that's not clear, let me know. So moving on, apps and third-party platforms. So very important to understand what kind of information can be found out about you based on where that information is accessible online and how that information is put out there onto the internet. Sometimes just going about your ordinary business can put you at risk. So again, understanding the way that you use the tools and the tools that you use and the platforms that you routinely engage with can be gathering information about you that can put you at risk. So a couple of years ago, or a few years ago now, it was revealed that Facebook, and this is the Facebook app on your device, not Facebook on a desktop, may be able to read text messages and emails that are contained on that device. So if you install the Facebook app on a cell phone, and then you have that Facebook app open, or you haven't shut it down, and then you go in and read your emails, or you go in and read your text messages, Facebook and various other tools now have trackers that follow you around your device, follow you around the internet, with the purpose of being able to send advertising and monitor what you're doing. And they're picking out keywords in text messages, in emails, in various other things to be able to target advertising. And Facebook is affiliated with hundreds of other companies and organizations that also do the same thing.
What's interesting is a lot of times when you load an app on a phone, I'm trying to think, I loaded one, I think it was Turkish Airlines. I loaded the Turkish Airline app on my phone a couple of weeks ago because I'm doing some traveling. And it was really interesting because I hit install and then it starts, give access to your photographs, give access to your messaging, give access. And it's like, this is an airline app I'm going to use for traveling. Why would it need access to my photographs? Why would it need access to my contact list? Why would it need? And so part of this process is when you are updating or you are, loading a new app on your phone, it will ask you a large amount of questions. Too often what people do is they'll just go through it going, yes, 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 and give access to everything. I always look at what the app is and I look at what I'm trying to use it for. And if it's asking for access to photographs, contacts, or my messaging systems, unless I require to have it because that's what the app tool is, you just say no. Most apps will still let you load it with restricted capabilities. But like I said, an airline app doesn't need to have access to my photographs. It definitely doesn't need to have access to my messaging. And it doesn't stop me from loading the app. However, strangely enough, when you install it, it does ask those questions.
Yeah, for sure. It is really important. One of the things that we definitely don't do, or for the most part we don't do, is read the end user agreement or the terms and conditions of what it is we're signing up for. And it's important to just be aware at a high level here that the terms and conditions differ, usually whether if you're installing them on a desktop or a device. So if you're installing them on a device, the way the app is set up, the way that it operates is different to how it does on a desktop. So it is important to, and it's a double-edged sword, because you really should set up automatic updates so that, particularly for security purposes, so that your apps are updated automatically. The downside to that is it doesn't give you the opportunity always to see what that update contains and whether or not you're now agreeing to something that you didn't agree to before. And that's how the Facebook algorithm slipped through the permissions to read text messages and emails. And it was something that people gave permission for, but because it was contained in an update, people didn't read it and weren't aware of it. So FaceTime, this was shown recently that FaceTime may be able to surreptitiously record audio and video. They were called out on that and removed that capability, or they removed that process. However, again, it shows that the capability is there. It is possible for conversations to be surreptitiously recorded. And this brings a bigger subject up, and that is when you're engaging with somebody, it is important to consider that they may be surreptitiously videoing you, they may be surreptitiously recording you. And there's, if anybody that's carrying a device at any time has a recording device on them at all times, has a video recorder on them at all times. So it takes away that plausible deniability. And again, I'm not saying that most people would do that, they would not, but just to be aware that if somebody is in a situation where they feel threatened or they're gathering evidence against you, just be aware that that can happen. We've talked about geolocation briefly. Instagram, Twitter, and Snapchat are the ones that reveal geolocation. Facebook typically does not. TikTok, that's fairly easy to switch on and off. But Instagram, Twitter, and Snapchat are really the ones. Snap Maps, most young people keep Snap Maps on. And if you don't know what that is, it gives everybody in your circle your physical location. So you can see where all your friends are all the time. However, there are algorithms, and they're called APIs that are brought together by other tools. And all of these APIs can increase the capability of these tools separately, so that all of the data from all of these platforms is brought together into one platform and allows you to see visually where people are, what they're posting, and when they're posting, all at the same time. LinkedIn can routinely reveal email and phone number. There's an extension that you can put in any browser called Hunter. And what that does is when you go to somebody's LinkedIn account, regardless of the status of that account, it pulls out the personal information. It's used all the time in investigations, but people don't really realize that it can do that. So if you have your phone number or your email address attached to any social media platform, I, as an investigator, can probably find it. You can use the password reset mechanism, or you use a browser extension, and it just automatically pulls that information out. So I always urge everybody, if you have a phone number attached to any social media platform whatsoever, whether you're using it for two-factor authentication or anything else, remove that phone number. There are many other ways to do two-factor authentication without using a phone number attached to a social media profile. WhatsApp, Instagram, and Messenger are merging now, and the information that is in one platform will now be across all. So it's important to understand that although WhatsApp uses fairly robust two-factor authentication and also end-to-end user encryption, Messenger is not that great, and neither is Instagram. Instagram has been breached many times, and so has Messenger. So Messenger is better, WhatsApp is best, but with the three merging, Facebook has lots of form for not being particularly secure and not honoring their privacy settings. So what I would say is, if you have private conversations that are old or obsolete on any of those platforms, I would be removing them to make sure that they don't suddenly become public as part of this merger, because Facebook has done that before. So how do we protect our accounts? And there is a handout for this presentation that gives some of this advice, but I'll run through these really quickly. So enable two-factor authentication for login, as well as automatic notification of attempted logins from unauthorized devices, and also to take a look routinely at your security settings on every platform to see where you have open connections. So two-factor authentication can be done either through an email account that's only used for two-factor authentication. I wouldn't use a regular email account that you use, because then that may be subject to a breach. I would be using the Authenticator app or the Authy app, which is a Google app. Authenticator is a standalone app. You can install these on your device, and it will just give you an automatic code. So every time you log in, go to your Authenticator app, it gives you a code. It's a unique code every time, but it just means that if somebody else is trying to get into your account, they cannot bypass that authentication. If they try to bypass the authentication, your device is set up and your account is set up to notify you that somebody is trying to access your account. Holly, you look like you need to ask me something. You're on mute though.
Naturally, I am. Sorry about that. There's a question around Signal. I'm guessing it's an app. Would you mind please mentioning Signal? It's supposed to be safer, but question mark. How have you used it before, and can you speak on it?
Yeah, for sure. So Signal is a communication app, very similar to WhatsApp and very similar to Telegram, except it has some unique features, very similar to Telegram, but Signal allows you to remove either side of a conversation. So, and Telegram is the same. So when you're communicating with somebody, if you've said something in that conversation and you then want to remove that, you can set it up in one of two ways. You can set it to self-destruct after a certain period of time. So if you want that message to disappear after 5 or 10 seconds, that your message will disappear. It also allows you to go back through the conversation and remove whatever parts of the conversation you want from either side. So you're not just removing it from your side, you're removing it from the entire conversation. It will also tell you if somebody has taken a screenshot. So if you're conversing with somebody, you send an image, somebody screenshots that, a notification will come up on the screen to say that the other person has taken a screenshot of that conversation.
And I think the non-technical answer, because I classify myself in that situation, is Signal is one of the better apps. So Signal is used widely for people, after WhatsApp was taken over by Facebook. Signal is an app I utilize every day. It's a robust app. It's one of the more safe, secure apps. So yes, we do suggest Signal.
Yeah, and it's not easy to hack. So it's much safer for private communications. We've mentioned phone numbers. Change your password and your username every 6 months. Don't have a username attached to an email address, and try and make your passwords unique and random. This one's a no-brainer. Don't share your login information with anybody else. People still do. Don't instruct your browser to remember your password. Most browsers now are set up to ask to remember a password or login information or banking information. When you log in, always say no. You don't want that. Your browser is easier to hack than your account. So you want to make sure that's logged down. Make sure you log out after every session, particularly on a device, but also on a desktop. We've talked about checking user sessions. Everybody knows about not clicking through links in emails. Even if the link looks authentic, even if the page looks authentic, do not click through links in emails unless you are expecting that email and it's something that is coming in. Quite often websites or people that will send you emails for phishing or to find information about you will use the actual email address and then use a redirect in the background. So it looks entirely authentic. Unless you can be sure that it's authentic, don't click through. Don't store any financial information on apps. whatsoever.
Julie.
So in terms of data protection, restrict content, of course, to friends and family only, and that includes photographs. Hide friends and connections from others. Don't allow people to tag you. Remove your profile from search engines. Restrict membership to private groups only, but also remember that private groups, again, can become public. So just be aware of that. On this one, I would say just the general messaging here is to post thoughtfully and with consideration for future privacy settings. What's private now may not be private in a year or 5 years from now when the company is bought out by somebody else or changes the privacy settings. What's private can become public.
And not even that. I mean, we've seen this happen numerous times in politics. Somebody will post something and 10 years later it comes back and bites them in the butt. We had a city councillor in Vancouver at 18 post a picture of himself in underwear. Unfortunately, when he was running, that became public and he had to step down. And the reality is once you post it, even if you delete it, it's still out there. So always be very considerate of the fact that most agencies now are starting to do background checks that include internet investigations. Again, 10 years ago, when you hired somebody, nobody really cared. Now, more and more agencies will do online exposure investigations as part of their recruitment process, because they do want to see what your social media profile looks like. Is there anything inappropriate? And it's actually become the norm, which is really challenging. I say about the past 2-3 years.
Yeah. Sure.
Pretty much everybody now, as part of the recruitment process, will look at your social media history and background and connections.
Mm-hmm. So just on this slide, I just do want to mention, it says here about data breach sites. So many people aren't aware that data breach databases occur, and there's many of them out there. And so the way a data breach happens, and there's nothing you can do to stop data breaches. This is not something that happens on the user side. This is something that happens on the server end. So let's say you sign up for Dropbox or Spotify or fitness app or any of these apps or any online service you sign up for. When you sign up, you're asked for certain personal information, usually name, address, phone number, sometimes credit card information. You'll put a certain username in there, and all of that information is collected in order for you to use that service. And that is stored on the servers of the tool that you're using. These servers are regularly and routinely targeted, and that information is stolen. And you hear about data breaches all the time. What we often don't realize is that your information may be subject to a data breach. And if it is likely held in a database somewhere that is searchable, and you can search it. So it's not technical. This is a case of going to a data breach website, which I will demonstrate, and you can search for your email addresses, and it will tell you if you've been included in any data breaches. And I would recommend you do this for every email address that you have. And if you have been included in a data breach, you need to change your passwords right away. The data breach website I'll show you is just one of many. It's a free service. You don't need to log in. Just put your email address in there and it will tell you. But there's all kinds of personal information that can be breached and that can be exposed. This information is typically then sold to hacker groups in the dark web that then use it for anything from malware to ransomware to personal threats to these CRA calls that we all get, these scam calls. They all come from somewhere. Usually it's from data breaches. So I'll do a demonstration of that. This we've really already covered, but really it comes down to always maintaining your personal, corporate and professional integrity when you're online. And I'm racing through that real fast because we're running out of time.
We have a couple of questions, and I know that we're short on time. But the first one is, if your phone number was once associated with your account and you remove it, is there any point in removing it? I assume the number is already out there.
So I would say it's worth removing it anyway. Always just do that. And then I would go and search data breach websites and see whether or not you've been included in a data breach and whether that phone number is exposed. There are all kinds of deep web databases, so just regular online databases that capture your phone number anyway, if it's associated. It's still worth removing, always. It's always worth, whatever information you take away, search engines renew their databases and deep web databases renew their content fairly regularly. So even if it is out there at the moment, it may be removed in a future update.
And not only that, I mean, depending on the level of sophistication around the person doing the attacker, somebody like me, something I'll search your LinkedIn account, and if your phone number's there, can I use it? I might not be able to do what Julie does, where she goes in the dark web and finds what's been deleted. But again, we want to take away as much information as possible. So if it's forward facing, you can find it. The likelihood is somebody else might be able to find it. You might not have somebody with Julie's skill set looking into it. So by just deleting it on what you can find, will alleviate those risks and concerns. So really important.
Thank you.
So when we go through, sorry, go ahead, Ali.
There's one more question. I'm sorry.
Yeah.
How effective is using something like LastPass password app?
Yeah, I would definitely say password managers are better than no password manager, depending on
their rating.
Yeah, I mean, password managers have been hacked. The biggest risk with a password manager is that you will forget your main passphrase. And if you do, then you lose everything. For me, I tend to have a process that I use for passwords that is based on a theme, but every single one is different. But that's very, very difficult. It becomes, if you've got several hundred passwords like I do, becomes very, very difficult to remember all of them. So I would certainly say over writing them down or over using the same password over and over again, definitely use LastPass or one of the other password managers for sure.
And I think that's important. I mean, it's hopefully Julie will get to be able to show you a site shortly. I got breached in a database, and I used the same username and the same password pretty much for all my social media. Like I said, I'm not one of the techie guys, and it was interesting because what happened then was they were able to gain access to a lot of unimportant things. I mean, my Netflix account got breached and moved to somebody else. So having different passwords across the board and then using a device, I mean, me being old school, I write my passwords down, they're locked in my safe on a piece of paper. You can have an app on your phone. There are certain apps that are really secure. And there's some that, when you go on their ratings, you'll see they're not that good. So yeah, it's a good thing to do.
And just to add to that, writing your passwords down and locking them somewhere safe is a perfectly legitimate approach. That's probably safer than having them online. Because the amount of effort it would take to get into your house, get into the room where your safe is, get into your safe for those passwords is probably more secure than having them somewhere like a device or written down on, in your photo app or something like that. So yeah, I mean, there's no real right or wrong way to do it. Just make sure they're unique, make sure they're changed regularly, and make sure that you don't leave yourself logged in, because having a password and then staying logged in on an app negates having a password.
Okay, so back to hunters versus howlers, and this is a really important thing for me when I work on threat files. There's been a lot of research done out of this and a lot of papers written. The reality is we have two different types of people when we see threats against individuals. You have people that we call hunters and we have people that we call howlers. Howlers are people who verbalize it. So you'll see them go to social media. You will see them either threaten the person or attack the person or go off their professional status. The reality is, from all the research we've done, very few times do howlers actually follow through with the targeted attack. The nice thing about howlers as well is for the investigation side and also the threat assessment side, it's a tool that we use to actually monitor them. The more they use in a social media platform to air the grievance, the less concerned we are. Hunters are the people who actually don't communicate too much directly. These are the people who just gather information. So, I always say to people, if you have somebody who's unhappy with your services and they do a really nasty rating on Rate My Doctor, or they do a really nasty post on social media, it's very important that you follow up with that. It's really important that people look at it. But it's less concerning than somebody showing up at your practice trying to gather information about you, or finding that you keep bumping into somebody you had a confrontation with on a regular basis in social settings. So a lot of times, people will have somebody attack them online, and the media response is this person's going to target me. The reality from history and from past investigations is people who vent online actually very seldom carry out attacks. Usually it's third-party leakage, so there'll be communication with other individuals, but it's not actually directed towards the individual. So just something to be aware of. So what can we do? And this is the important part for me, is how do we alleviate some of these concerns? So the first one is be aware what makes you vulnerable. And the sad part, folks, is every day you go to work, that makes you vulnerable. Because of the environment you work in, there is unique challenges. And unfortunately, we've seen this change dramatically over the past 18 months. We've seen families being torn apart between, do we get vaccinated or do we not get vaccinated? We've seen mass protests around hospitals. So the reality is just going to work makes you vulnerable, but also think about it further than that. A lot of times, and like I said, I spent 10 years working the gangs. My biggest vulnerability was my children. They were the ones who were exposing the most information online, but they were also the ones, if somebody decided to target me, the easiest way to impact my world was my kids. So sometimes just take a step back and think, okay, where are my vulnerabilities and how can I reduce risk around those vulnerabilities? Pay attention to environment and context, and this is massive. And in today's day and age, unfortunately, we get so busy and tied up in everything that's going around us. Too often people forget or miss telltale signs. I don't know how many files I've gone in and worked where there's been telltale signs. We've had mail stolen from the residence, or there's been tampering around the residence, or there's been inappropriate communication, and the person has just been so busy or so caught up in their daily lives that they didn't pay attention to it, and more importantly, they didn't report it or respond to it. So very important to pay attention to the environment. Predict how that environment may develop over time, and always remember, more time gives you more ability to respond, react, and disengage. And then watch for warning indicators. Whenever you're dealing with an unknown, very, very important, you watch how that person is, how they're presenting, and I'll talk about that as we go along. So some of the risk factors, and unfortunately, because of your profession, this is stuff you deal with on a daily basis. Alcohol, drug addiction is a huge one, mental health, influence of social media, and this is one that I always battle to talk about. Coming from law enforcement, you've seen every police department over the last year come out and say, well, something, we admit we've got a problem with racism. And the challenge I have with that is you're painting every person in that department with a brush. And people then expect you to be that way. I'm 6'3", 290 pounds, ex-special forces from South Africa. People expect me to be racist just based on that. And when your departments are articulating that, it makes it harder. And we've seen this in health authorities as well. Health authorities have come out and said, we know we have a challenge with racism, and therefore we need to address it. The reality is there might be some people who are identified that way, but it's a small amount. But it puts you in a position where if you're dealing with somebody, you could be immediately expected to be racist. Or more importantly, if you do something that that person disagrees with or doesn't like, they're immediately going to go back to the racism card because your agency, your organization has identified that that's a challenge and a concern. Family or personal crisis, history of violence and threatening incidents, and feeling of desperation. History of violence and threatening incidents is huge for us. So whenever we do risk assessments, if we have somebody even potentially looking at targeting somebody, the first thing we will go to is what is their past history? Because the reality is if somebody's used violence in the past, they will use violence in the future. Hey, Holly.
Hi, I'm back. I have a quick question in here. It says,
Yeah.
Did you say that if someone complains online about you, that it is recommended that you should address or respond to it?
Correct. So non-respond to it. Please, when I talk about responding, I mean that's you gathering information and taking it to the right individuals. So for anybody who works for one of the health authorities, every health authority has got an in-house security team. Most of them have got extremely qualified individuals. Vancouver Island Health's got one. Coastal Health is unique. So Coastal Health falls under Fraser Health, and Fraser Health's protective services is actually a very large unit, got some very skilled individuals. The interior, you have 2 people with protective services. Unfortunately, northern region, you don't. But again, I'd be trying to reach out to maybe the one of the other ones. If you don't work for one of the health authorities, my suggestion is either engaging the police. And if you don't get traction with the police, look at some other options. Because a lot of times with the threat assessment, you'll be able to have people come to you and look at it and go, you know something, this is a concern. These are some, suggestions, and we'll help police to make this a priority for them to investigate, or come to you and say, you know something, we've looked at this individual. He's 100% a howler. You have peace of mind, but this is what we suggest just to make sure, he can't get access to your information.
Thank you. We have one more question. I had flowers sent to me at work and at home by someone who wrote creepy notes about being obsessed. I called the flower shop and apparently the person paid in cash and they could not give me a description. This happened some time ago. However, it still hangs over me. Any suggestions on what I should do?
Actually, my email will be at the end of this presentation. If the person can reach out, because I do need to ask some personal questions, and I'd prefer not to do it on an open forum if that's all right with.
Thank you.
Perfect. So what are triggers? So when we deal with people, what can we do to cause a person to react? And some of the research we've done in this process, we've looked at lawyers, judges. We did a lot of work with paramedics about 8 years ago in this regard. Health officials, we've tried to figure out what are some of the triggers when people are in distress, or when people are already on an agitated or a higher alert. What can we do as a person to make them worse? Well, the first one is being ignored. Second one is excessive emotional tension. I'll come back to that one. Excuse me. Receiving negative or bad news, ineffective communication, and disregard for personal space. So giving excessive emotional tension, this was a unique one because I worked a file where we had somebody who really cared about the victim and really tried to be extremely supportive and engage in the victim. And what happened was the victim actually took that as that this person cared for them, loved them, wanted more out of the relationship than the professional relationship. So what we always say to people is when you're dealing with people, it's always professional. Be very careful of getting that emotional attachment. And a lot of times that's hard because a lot of times you actually care what the person's going through and they see that as emotional attachment. Ineffective communication, that's a hard one. Coming out of the military, one of the hardest things I learned when I started policing in Canada was how to communicate with people, how to have a conversation. My brain works when somebody's talking, I'm listening to what they're saying, so I can actually figure out how I'm going to respond, which is not actually listening. So it's actually, practicing on your ability to communicate. And then the big one is disregard for personal space, and I'll talk about that in an individual slide. So what are the behaviors of concern? Well, we have inappropriate, we have intimidation, we have threatening, and we have violence. And it's really important to realize that this is part of the pathway through violence. So a lot of times inappropriate behavior will actually lead to violence, and we need to monitor it as it goes along. So if somebody's using criticism, somebody you've given them care, they leave and they turn around and go, you're a shitty doctor, and they walk out. Is that something you need to be concerned about? Well, really and truly, it's inappropriate communication. It's not a huge risk, but it can go further on. So what we always say to people is if you have somebody who's doing inappropriate communication or trying to intimidate you, and intimidating is where we draw the line. The minute there's any form of intimidation, that is when you need to engage. Like I said, if you're with the health authority, their security services, if you're not with the health authority, police, or individuals like myself and Julie, and we can help you through that process. But it's the behavior that tells us where the person is and how they're escalating. So pre-assaultive cues. So when you're dealing with somebody, how do you know when they're going to become violent? You know, the reality is if I'm standing, my hands on my pockets and my shoulders are relaxed, it's very hard for me to lash out. It's very hard for me to strike. So there's certain, telltale body signs that actually indicate where a person's mindset is and how they potentially will react. So pacing, eye contact, clenched fist, shoulder movements. The minute the person starts to raise their voice or speech starts to break down. So if you're having a conversation with somebody and you notice that they can no longer put sentences together, it means the adrenaline's dumping into the system and that person is getting ready to fight. And it's really important that you are aware of that. You notice I talk with my hands a lot, and this is just years of dealing with people. I talk with my hands a lot because it gives me the ability to react very quickly. But if you're dealing with somebody and you can see they're agitating, their hands are moving and their shoulders are up, that's a telltale sign that that person could potentially become violent in that incident. And when we were talking about impulsive violence, these are the important telltale signs to pay attention to when you're dealing with people, because it's not like targeted violence. It's not something where there's a process. It's something where it's going to react very quickly. So body language is extremely important. So proximity is something we've been training for years to law enforcement, and we've used it now to train with everybody. It was interesting. I was at my GP's practice out in Maple Ridge last week, and he's changed his setup. So what he's done is he's got it now when the patient comes in, you stuck in the corner, he's by the door. And it's just how we deal with people from a personal space point of view. I always say anybody I don't know is outside of striking distance with me. They can't come in closer than, I like to keep them ideally at 6 feet. So when we deal with individuals, just realize we can use space to buy ourselves time. So how you set up your practice interview rooms, or treatment rooms, how and where do you sit, and where does the patient sit? Also, when I'm dealing with people, a lot of times I'll put, some form of barrier between myself and them. So if you're talking to somebody and you have a desk between you and them, that buys you space. So personal space is really important. Also realizing that sometimes when we, change the way we present ourselves, we can intimidate the person. So if I walk up to somebody and just based on my size, stand over them and start asking them questions, that could be seen as a sign of threat or sign of intimidation on their part, and they might respond. So just taking into account, space means time, which means ability to react and respond. Some of the key things we can do: avoid working in isolation and unsafe situations. Avoid environments that are difficult to control. Adjust your approach, and take note of source of assistance. Now, it was interesting. I spent a couple of months in VGH trauma base doing some research on violence, and something I think I saw more violence there every night than I ever did in the policing community on a per shift basis. The reality is nowhere in any person in healthcare's job description does it say you're a punching bag or you're there to be verbally berated. And it's coming up with abilities to control that. It's also coming up with the realization that that is unacceptable behavior. When somebody's targeting you online, that needs to be addressed, and there is a mechanism to address it. That is not normal behavior. And too often, when I was interviewing nurses, they would come back and they go, "It's part of the job." The reality is it should never be part of the job. Violence is not acceptable, and there needs to be mechanisms put in place, and we need to take it more seriously. And very important to report it.
I think just to add in here as well, one of the ways that we were always encouraged in policing was to give people an alternative method of complaint. So if somebody is really angry with you, give them somewhere to direct that anger to. Give them the advice of calming down and you'll get seen quicker, calming down and you'll get, rather than escalating, always de-escalate. Give them, if you're unhappy, here's somebody you can contact. If something has not, been satisfactory to you, here is the right and correct method of dealing with that. So everyone's not going to be happy all the time, but if you can in the moment de-escalate that by giving them an alternative target, for want of a better word, an alternative method of expressing that unhappiness that doesn't hurt anybody, that is appropriate, that's writing to somebody or making a phone call to somebody, that takes that immediate threat away from you in that moment and de-escalates that situation, then that's also a legitimate method of de-escalation as well.
Yeah. And then the big one is, take note of source of assistance. So when I was trained in ERT teams, this is one of the things I would say to the guys all the time is, hey, if you're in a situation, play the what if game. And so you walk into a restaurant and you go, okay, if you go to a restaurant in Vancouver, and thank God it's settling down now, but when we were having the gang wars, we were having regular violent incidences occur. So what are you going to do? If you walk into a treatment room next time, think about, okay, what happens if this patient becomes belligerent or becomes aggressive or reacts badly? How am I going to respond? The problem is we have a thing called, fight, flight, or freeze. And it's a situation that occurs when you get into a high risk situation. You either choose to fight, you choose to freeze, or you choose to flee. And the sad part is most people freeze. And the reason they freeze is they don't have a plan. If you get into a violent situation and you're trying to think of a plan in the moment, the likelihood of you being able to come up with one is zero. But if you have thought of a plan beforehand, so if if I'm in my treatment room and this person becomes abusive, all I'm going to do is walk out and go to my reception counter, and there's an area there that I'm safe. If you've already thought about that process and it's already set into your mindset, it's like muscle memory. The more you practice, the better you are at responding. And it's always good to have a plan, because if you have a plan, you have the ability to respond. If you don't have a plan and you're trying to create a plan during a potentially hostile incident, very hard for you to respond. And that's where most people freeze. So always watch for, warning signs, pre-assaultive cues. Monitor the environment. Big one, always have an exit strategy. How am I going to get out of this situation? Assess for weapons of opportunity, distance, and the big one, folks, trust your instinct. If your gut's saying it's bad, all likelihood it's bad. And too often we see this, and when you were doing the training with the paramedics, they would have a hard time to disengage. And the reason they would say is because we wanted to care for the person. And assess the behavior. If somebody's responding because it's a brain injury or it's a mental health, you might want to push through it. But if somebody's just being aggressive and angry and there's no justification, or it's because of certain narcotics or alcohol, you might want to change your response to it. And if your gut's saying it's bad, go with it's bad. Now, this is the big one for us. So what do? Always speak to others, report threats, concerns, and incidences, and seek advice. Like I said, if you work in the health authorities, they have great teams, except for the Northern. And hopefully at some point in time, Northern will either engage Interior or Fraser Health to assist them. But there's a lot of agencies. There's the behavioral science group out of the RCMP. There are people like us. At the end of this presentation, we will have our emails up. Fire us an email if you've got a question. One of the things we both of us really care about is prevention. So something, if you send me an email going, hey, Carl, this happened, what are your thoughts? There's no cost for that. I would rather give somebody advice and something, not get work out of it, than get a call 2 days later and your world's been blown apart. So we really and truly do focus on communication is huge. Report, get advice. Too often, actually, I can say this from effect, I've been doing security management around high profile individuals now for about 30 years. Every targeted attack I've worked on, every one, when we've gone back and we've looked at it, they've been telltale signs. Mm-hmm. And the sad part is most of them, the person who's been targeted who lived has actually come out and identified them themselves. So it's not us going in and going, oh, wow, we could see an attack was about to occur. They would be telling us their story. And as they were telling us their story, they'd be like, that was kind of weird. On this day, this happened, and this person said that, and then this happened. And you can see them actually going, I missed it. So something, if you have a concern and you're not sure, Rather report it and have somebody look at it. There is no such thing as a stupid or, you over worrying. Too often we get people going, well, I think I'm overthinking this, I'm over. No, that's not the reality. Rather report it, have it looked at, and then you have peace of mind. Then you have the reactive side of it, which is when we get involved after the fact, and your whole world's been shook up. So really important to communicate it out and talk to others about it. So before we get into questions, what I've asked Julie to do now is show you a couple of online apps. I've also asked her to use my information because, I went through a privacy breach, and she can walk you through some of the challenges online so you can actually see how it works. So Julie, over to you.
Yeah, and if there are any questions now, go ahead and ask them while I'm just setting this up as well.
Hey, Holly.
Hi. I'm just reading any questions. Oh, you're welcome, Dr. Meyer. There are some questions about process, and thank you for Elizabeth White for responding to Dr. Yang. Just with the health authority, the process to file a complaint, like Julie, you had mentioned, and just, redirecting them to de-escalate the situation. In a health authority in a hospital situation, it's much easier to do, but the only real resource when you're a community physician in your own clinic or in a group clinic is to go through the college, which can be quite the process. So if physicians have any questions about that, I just ask you to reach out to your regional advisor and advocate, and they'd be able to help support you through that on what that process is.
And something you can choose also to not provide service to the person. And I know in our smaller communities, this is extremely challenging. But there are times where you do need a cooling off period. A lot of times we will see a file where, emotions are extremely charged. And sometimes actually coming up with a different approach buys that time. So if we have no further questions, I'll get Julie to show you what we do.
Yeah, I think this might be a question for one of the RAs. In the community, there are resources for preparing for violent situations with staff and colleagues. I'll let
Actually, Holly, I can answer that from a governance point of view. So from colleagues and either your peers or staff you work with, WorkSafe's been actually very clear about it. And it was really interesting a couple of years, and I can't remember when this happened. WorkSafe actually identified it as an area that the employer has to address. And so WorkSafe actually has a really good process. And Holly, what I could do is later today maybe send the WorkSafe section on workplace violence to you. So your employer has to do a couple of things. Now, for a physician who owns his own office, this doesn't really apply because you are the employer. But if you're working in a health authority, if you have a violent incident, your employer, i.e. the health authority, has to do a risk assessment. And they have to come up with mechanisms to alleviate those risks in the future. There's also very clear processes around bullying and harassment and violence towards others within the workplace. And like I said, again, if you're working within a health authority, they are clearly identified, they have policies in place. Or if you're working for any agency besides yourself, they are guided actually by WorkSafe now. So it's no longer an option. There's a mandatory process that has to occur as it pertains to violence within the work environment.
Thank you. Somebody may ask the question, should they take a self-defense class?
The problem with self-defense is you've got to do it on a regular basis. So I always say to people, be very careful. If you can take a self-defense class that's focused on situational awareness, they are extremely beneficial because they teach you more how not to get in that situation. It's so one of the things I still do at the moment is I train tactical operations to anti-gang units down in Central America. So I teach them how to defend themselves. I don't teach self-defense because the reality with any form of martial arts, I need to train you for about 5 years to teach you how to use martial arts. but there's some great little techniques you can use that aren't martial arts, that are basic common sense things that actually will respond to anybody. And so I don't want to get it too much into on this call. If the person again wants to reach out to me on my email, I can definitely have a conversation with them. But what I would look at is somebody who puts on a situational self-protection course. So don't go take martial arts. Look for somebody who's training you in how to prepare for a situation and how to respond. A lot of the police departments do it. They have great programs. Vancouver City Police has got one of the best female self-defense orientation courses I've ever seen. Unfortunately, the RCMP stopped theirs because of budget, but there are a lot of agencies which will do a 4-hour orientation. And like I said, it's not martial arts. So I'm not saying to somebody, go sign up and learn martial arts. You're wasting your time. But taking a self-defense course focusing on situational awareness, extremely viable.
Okay, thank you. Next one. I worry about this is more of a comment. I worry about the loss of many healthcare workers due to the vaccine mandates and the potential for more organized group type attacks or threats.
So there was something really interesting I was reading this morning. So the feds are actually looking at introducing legislation around this that'll become a criminal offense. And I know the province has tabled legislation around we will put buffer zones in. The problem with buffer zones, they don't work. And I always say to people this, just because there's a piece of paper that says people can't do things, doesn't mean they're not going to do things. So it's something I would be aware of at the moment. We are seeing an escalation. A good example was Kelowna Remembrance Day, when the Remembrance Day was taken over by people who wanted to speak out, and it actually became physical. So it is a concern. And unfortunately, I think this is going to be an ongoing concern for a period of time. So I would be aware of it. But it's also important to know the federal government is looking at making it a criminal act and a defined criminal act. And the provincial government is looking at introducing legislation. And we believe the legislation on both of those, that we're talking, pushing them through before Christmas.
Thank you, Carl. One more, or two more, sorry. Can you give an example of how I should design? Can you give an example on how I should design my community office to be safer? Floor plans, it's a challenge prioritizing safety while making the environment welcoming to patients.
So the most important thing Julie and I do is like Julie said, she doesn't believe in locking down social media. I do not believe in designing Fort Knox. I think it's inappropriate. Whenever I work with people, I say to them, the key is if we turn your practice or we turn your residence into a jail, the people have already succeeded. They've been able to intimidate you beyond extreme measures, because now you're living in this constant fear environment. So it's using space, it's making sure there's no weapons of opportunity. So making sure your counters are slightly higher. In your practices, like in the treatment areas, making sure your space is always closer to the door than your patients, and being aware of weapons of opportunity. And I always I say that with a smile on my face, because I know what doctors have in their offices, and they are tons of weapons of opportunity, but how readily they're available. And for this person, feel free to reach out to me again on email, and I would love to have a conversation. And if you can send me some pictures, I'll give you some advice. The thing for us, and I just love to articulate it, Julie and I have been fortunate that, we do this, well, I don't want to say fortunate because that sounds terrible, but we're both really passionate about what we do. We love what we do. And taking a phone call from a doctor or working with you on some pictures and office design, for us, that is our way of giving back for what you guys do. We look at what healthcare has done for this country and for us and our families. And for me to spend half a day working with a doctor on office design, that's my way of giving back to the system, a system that has really been extremely supportive during 2 horrific years. So please, I encourage everybody, take down our emails at the end of this presentation. If you want us to walk you through that, you can send me some pictures. We can come up with some great ideas. This is not going to be something we're charging you for. This is our way of giving back to an amazing community who's stood by Canadians for the last 18 months. So it would be, our privilege and pleasure to work with you on that, and to try talk you through it on this without actually seeing the layout and getting a better understanding of what your practice looks like would be really hard. So that's something I can definitely do one-on-one.
Thank you, Carl. There's one more. This one will be more for the RAA, or the Regional Advisor and Advocate. So I'm just going to read it out and then ask the person to connect with our Regional Advisor and Advocate. And it's, is there any plan for tracking the actual number of incidences and type of incidences affecting physical and psychological safety at the workplace and in community, hospitals, or both? And is there any existing data? Rob or the RA can pipe into the chat and answer that. I don't think it's used. So I think that there's a way, but I don't think it has been utilized, unless Carl or Julie, you want to take a stab at that one. I don't know if that's in your way.
I do know some of the health authorities track it. The biggest challenge we find is people, it's underreported, because like I said in the beginning, people almost like that's part of the job. So if you work in a health authority, extremely important to report it, because without numbers, it's not really considered a concern. Too often we will go in to work with an agency, and we'll meet with the management team, and they'll go, well, we don't believe it's a concern. We've had 11 incidences. We'll go out and do interviews and find out there's been hundreds. So if you're in a health authority, extremely important to report it. But the community practices are the hard ones, because I don't believe that information is captured. I'm not aware of that. And that would be extremely viable. One of the things that I did about 5 years ago, I looked at violence against prosecutors and judges across Canada. And, we went into it as a research paper, not thinking we would find the results we found. But what was able to come out of it was we realized that, there was some common challenges that we would find in Kamloops that we saw in Toronto. And because of that information, and because we were able to gather that information, we were actually able to come up with a more robust approach and a more robust plan. So, Holly, I'm not sure what you are doing for your community practices, but if there's a potential tool through Doctors of BC, even if it is, you just get an email saying, on this date, this incident occurred, and we track, is it in-person intimidation? Is it inappropriate communication? Was it a physical attempt? Because it's like anything. The more information we have, or the more information Doctors of BC has, the better it's able to respond to it. This training program is a result of potential challenges that doctors are facing. So if it's more identified and we have more data, it's easy to respond to, justify it, and also make sure that the real challenges are being addressed. And that's one of the key things. You don't want a training program that really and truly comes in and doesn't address any of your concerns. You want a training program that you walk away from it going, something, the guy talked funny, but at least he gave me 1 or 2 good ideas I'm going to think about. And that's our goal.
Yeah, and just to add on to that, I know for certain that violence and threats, harassment, stalking is completely underreported. I've seen it myself in your industry. I've worked on a number of files, and it is important to understand where the mechanism for reporting and the mechanism for having something done about that is falling down, because I think our tolerance has increased for violence, and it's become, as Carl said at the beginning, part of the job, and it should not be part of the job. There have been a couple of occasions recently where I've been in the medical system, I've been in a hospital, and I've seen how people are treated, and I am horrified that when I see the way that some of the doctors and nurses are even being spoken to, I look at that, and as a threat assessor, I look at that and say, that is a threat, and nobody's paying attention. The person on the receiving end of that is expected to just receive that. Nobody else in the room seemed to think that that was an issue. And it makes me realize that our tolerance for violence and threats is so high, and it needs to be lowered. And I believe it's probably because there aren't mechanisms in place for that to be dealt with, and it needs to be dealt with. And one of the things that Carl and I do is, and many people do, is taking a look at gap analysis. What mechanisms are in place? What safety protocols are in place? What needs to be tightened up? Because the media, due to social media, but due to the internet, the media reports more and more, and it is very difficult to get a sense of the reality.
Yeah.
Is there more or less violence? Are there more or less threats? And what's possible to be done to reduce those overall threats and that exposure to violence?
And what's interesting, Holly, is WorkSafe's actually changed the rules around PTSD. So PTSD used to be defined that you needed a specific incident. So the person had to go through a certain type of incident, to qualify for a WorkSafe PTSD claim. A couple of years ago, and I can't remember how long, I'm thinking maybe about 5 years ago, but I can look into it. They changed that. And they said, what we're starting to realize is people who work in high pressure environments that go through numerous small incidences of violence can over a period of time develop severe PTSD. And so WorkSafe actually changed the regulations and the act around workplace violence to identify that. And for me, what's sad about that is WorkSafe is saying, we know that we have employees out there that are going to be targeted multiple times in a potentially threatening situation, and therefore we will change our claim process to accommodate them. Well, for me, we should be saying, okay, we shouldn't have employees out there being targeted multiple times. For me, it would be more proactive if we went out there and said, something, if somebody gets threatened, we respond to it, we address it, and we try reduce it occurring again. But like I said, WorkSafe's identified that this is a huge challenge. The numbers in the health authorities are off the charts, and it's not it's not the policing type thing where you go to an incident and it's horrific and you go into trauma. It's ongoing, continuous personal attacks that are personal, and they're not being really and truly dealt with and managed. So that's the other thing to keep in the back of your mind. You go through a threatening situation, you go through a violent situation, it does have a long-term impact on you, and you might not believe it. And everybody responds to violence differently. Most people put it in a box, put it on a shelf, forget about it. Well, one day the shelf falls over. So that's a really good point. So any more questions?
There's one more, and then I'll let Julie get to what she wants to show us, because it's so much fun. I have a weird one here where a colleague's partner is the one online harassing. So the colleague can say, it's not me. I wonder if there's any guidance in this realm. So I guess a colleague's partner is doing some online harassing, but the colleague's saying it's not me. So
well, depending on what the harassings look like. So I've worked with the Law Society of BC, where I had an individual who was targeting, or he was smartly enough, they were not targeting somebody, they were using their spouse to target somebody. And we were able to tie the two together. And more importantly, we were able to prove to the Law Society that, yes, this person may or may not have been involved, because we couldn't prove that. But we could prove this person was well aware and wasn't doing anything to react to it. And there was some consequences through the professional association on that.
Thank you, Carl. So that is all for the questions at the moment. So if you want to go into what you're going to show us.
Okay.
Yeah, so I'll just share my screen again. Oops. First, just bear with me. Okay, so I'll just put this down here. So this is a tool that is publicly available. So it's called haveibeenpwned.com. Pwned is just another way of saying owned. It's hacker speak. So just basically replace the O with a P. So what this allows you to do is to search a number of different things. You can search email addresses, phone numbers, usernames. In this case, we're going to search Carl's email address.
We'll use my old government email address.
It's carl.profit. Right?
Yeah, carl.profit@gov.bc.ca.
So as I mentioned earlier with...
Somebody's got a hand raised.
Laura.
My eyes aren't good enough. Laura, you got a question?
No, I don't think so.
Okay. Oh.
The hand might be raised, but we can't hear them. They're on mute, so they'd have to type it into the chat just as a reminder.
Perfect.
No problem. So, as I mentioned, this for data breaches, this is not your fault. So this is not information that you have put out there. This information. Oh, BC does here.
Yeah, I was about to say. That's
We
good
know
news.
So this is a database where basically that information is all brought together. And you can see down here, it says that this email address has been found in 6 separate data breaches. So as we go down here, we can see the exact breaches that this has occurred in. So this is good intelligence in that it tells you what tools somebody is using and also what information has been taken in those breaches. So you can look at the dates here and see when these breaches occurred. So you can see how long somebody has had this email address, or how long ago. If you haven't changed your password for say a year or 2 years, you can see that you would have been included in this breach with the current information that you have. This website tells you the data that's been compromised, and you can see the types of information here, from physical address, phone numbers, job titles, social media profiles, geographic locations, IP addresses, employers, gender. So basically any information that you would hand over to any kind of tool, and every tool requires different information. Sometimes it might be banking information, sometimes it might be your home address. And this is publicly available. So this is a database that you don't need to log into. Go to this website, just put in your email address, and it will tell you what kind of information has been breached.
And for the non-technical folks like me, the way I look at this is key thing is when did the breach occur? So, let's say the breach occurred in July of this year, and I haven't changed my password on my accounts. I have a serious challenge because my password is likely now on the dark web, and that password can be tied to my username, which means people now have access to whatever those two are tied to. So for me, the first thing I always look at is what was the date? Then the second thing I look at is what information, because, if somebody's got my home address, that's always concerning. Now, can I change it? No. But it's at least good to know what's out there. So going through this for me is it's 2 things. It's 1, when did it occur, and do I need to change my password? And 2, more importantly, what information now is readily available. Now Julie's going to show what she can do further to actually find out what my password was.
So this is a tool called Dehashed. This is a database that you do need to have a username and password for. You do need to log into this, and it is a subscription tool. It's not expensive, but for me, it's worth it, but it's worth it for this demo just to be able to show you. So we're going to do the same thing, put Carl's email address into this. Now, something to consider with any data breach, Carl's just mentioned that it helps him understand what kind of data is out there and change passwords. Now, bear in mind, every email address is usually used as a username for other accounts. So if I have an email address, I also use that email address to log into Facebook. I use it for my social media. I use that email address to log into my banking. I use the email address for any other apps or tools that I log into. So it's not just the email address itself, the email account that needs to be changed. It may well be that it's all of these subsequent accounts. Because I can tell you from extreme experience that any hacker or person needs that has nefarious intentions is one email address, and you can reset every other account that person has if they have control of one email account. So it's not just a case of changing that one email account password, it's a case of changing all of them. So going over to Dehashed here, we can see, have I been pwned said that this email address had been involved in 6 breaches. If we go into this database, we can see that there's 7. and everyone will be different. These are all from different sources. So as we go into these, it will tell us over here, just move that, what information has come from, and there's different tools for this. This is the deep web, it's not the dark web. If I went to the dark web, I would get different information, but there's no time for that today. But as I go through, we can see Carl's password here that he was using.
And what's interesting about this, when this occurred, and before Julie actually, started, teaching me about this stuff, I used that email and that password for everything. So what happened was it got breached, and I was fortunate enough. I found out about it. I changed my banking, not a big deal. The small one, and it was an inconvenience, and it's not a big idea, but it tells you how they use the dark web. Was somebody hijacked my Netflix account? They logged in using my email and my password, and reset the username and the password to somebody else. One day I tried to log into Netflix, couldn't log in. Phone Netflix, after going back and forth and proving that I really was who I was, we determined my account had been hacked. Now, you think about sometimes how often we attach a certain email and a certain password to everything. And the big lesson for me out of this was if for some unknown reason my new email account gets compromised, I've got to remember what I've got that email account attached to. And I've started now, after Julie really pushing me hard on this, I have a different password for each account, which is not great because I get locked out of my accounts on a regular basis. But I don't use the same password for every account because if it gets breached, I don't want them to have access to everything. And it's sad because you don't expect this. This is nothing you've done wrong. This is because somebody's hacked into, like LinkedIn, got this information. And once they have this information, it's sold on the dark web. The challenge is as soon as they have it or somebody buys it, now they have access to everything that you've used that email for. So it's not like they're going to access your email account. That's not the challenge. It's the challenge is actually, well, they could, but the challenge could be they could access everything else. And at that time, that actually was my banking information. And thank God that was the one I called soon enough and changed.
Yeah, so just to show you
one. I just got a question. Okay.
Sorry. It's just a question asking to what is the dark web? Just sites hosting information, unethical information? Yeah,
so the internet really has 5 different environments. There's the surface web, which is everything accessible by search engines. The deep web, which is database-driven content and unique content, also multimedia, so videos, images, and anything in a database. So this would be considered a deep web database. You go to a website. TripAdvisor is a deep web database. Anything where you go to a particular website and put in information to do a search is deep web. That you don't find through Google. Then there's social media and the social web, which speaks for itself. Online communications and chat is its own environment. So Signal, WhatsApp, that kind of thing, apps. And then the dark web. The dark web is the part of the internet. It's like an internet in an internet. You cannot access it through normal means. There's certain browsers and certain tools that you need to access that. The dark web has .onion top level domains. So where in the surface web we use .com, .ca, .gov, in the dark web, it's always .onion. So if you went to Google and tried to type in a domain name with .onion, you would get nothing. The dark web is an anarchic environment. It's built on a network of networks called nodes. And I'm not going to go any more detailed than that, but basically it's where you find illegal, illicit content. It's a very hidden environment. But yeah, if you think of the internet itself and then the dark and criminal version of the internet that only can be accessed through certain tools that you have to download and then set up in a certain specific way, the dark web is kind of the Wild West of the internet, really. So yeah, just one more consideration that I just want to show you here. So when somebody gets a username and password like this, something that can be done, and this highlights the importance of using different passwords. I can take this password and I can do a reverse search of this password. So if you're using more than one password, or if you're using the same password for more than one tool, and that's been breached, somebody can do a reverse lookup on that password and find other email accounts and other areas on the web where you're using that same password. So it's possible to link together different accounts. So you might think, well, okay, yeah, I'm going to lose that account. But if you're using that password anywhere else, it will reveal all of your accounts. So yeah, that's just a quick overview of what data breaches look like and where the vulnerabilities are with usernames and passwords.
And you know, folks, we don't want to scare you. Today's presentation is not about, end of gloom. For both of us, it's hopefully giving you some basic tools, some basic understanding around violence. So you can actually just start thinking, where are you vulnerable? And if you're vulnerable, what can you do about it? Small things like Googling yourself, seeing actually what's out there. You'll be amazed what stuff gets posted that you are unaware of just on Google. Looking at your practices and coming up with a safety plan. Like, if you do have an incident, how do you get help? How do you get out of the situation? So the idea behind it, and Julie and I are always very cautious because it's a hard subject to teach, and what we don't want to do is scare everybody. It's not the end of the world. But for us, it's more about, something, just be aware, because if you have an incident and we coming in after the fact, that incident's with you for the rest of your life. So we would rather some real simple tools, some real simple precautions to try alleviate those incidences and try remove those risks.
Thank you. I see that there's one more question in there, but what I'll do is I'll let, when I send that, I have a document going to everybody that participated with the 2 documents that you had sent.
Okay, perfect.
So what I'll do is I'll include your email addresses, if that's okay. And that's
what I was about to say. Yeah, just make sure. And everybody today who's asked a question and I've kind of deferred you off, reach out. Like I said, it would be our pleasure to work with you. It would be our pleasure to see what we can do to assist you. So yeah, feel free to reach out. If it's targeted violence, risk, or actually, something is, you can send it to one of us and the 2 of us will talk about it and get a response to you. Like I was about to say, if it's IT, talk to Julie because I can't help you, but the 2 of us will communicate and see what we can do.
Yeah. Thank you so much. And thank you, Julie and Carl, for coming today. It's so great. And just looking at the comments, so much useful information and so much help provided in just the last 2 hours. So just thank you for coming again. And we look forward to hosting more of these next year. So we'll see you guys all soon. And thanks to everybody for your comments and questions. They were wonderful. Have a great day.
Thanks so much, everybody. Take care.
Bye.
Bye.